It's Wednesday, February 14th, 2024. Well, there isn't really much that would tie today's review to my discussion about Tiny Tina's Wonderlands from yesterday, except for the fact that Tiny Tina herself is an aggressively obnoxious character, and the anime series that I have watched the first half of for today's review is also aggressively obnoxious. But I think the main difference, and I just realized it as I started recording this, might be the fact that I love the terrible accents and terrible voice work of this series enough that it overcomes all the serious problems. So the anime series is a 4-part OVA I'm talking about, and this is 1990's Madball 34. Now, some of you may know that name. This is a pretty infamous series because of its over-the-top violence and sexual content, and I've heard of it for years. It's not available, I think, anywhere in any major format, but you can watch it for free on archive.org. So if you want to experience this thing, you can go watch it for free. It's not in great quality, but I don't think there's any better version that is widely available for people to get anyhow. But I will caution you. And look, I've watched some harsh stuff. I've watched some really harsh stuff in the past. But generally, the things that I've watched that have been like this are trying to serve some kind of point. They're not usually just mindlessly like this. Or if they are, you get the sense that maybe the people involved in them were so drug-addled that they didn't know what they were doing. And maybe that's the case with this one. But honestly, this feels like a very cynical, and in some ways, if this is the truth, then I actually do kind of respect the series. It feels like a very harshly, sarcastically cynical interpretation of the Dirty Harry popularity, the Dirty Harry character's popularity from the 1970s. And that transposed onto a version of New York City that at the time that the manga that this was based on was written was not in a great place. Late 70s, early 80s New York was not a tourist attraction the way it is today. It was a violent and dirty place to live. You can find many, many movies that will show you what New York looked like before. It's almost unrecognizable to anybody under a certain age because all most younger people know is the New York of today, which is a glossy surface you could eat off of compared to the cesspool that it was, 30, 40 years ago. Is it 40 years ago now? Yeah, I guess it would be about 30, 40 years ago, yeah. So Madball 34 takes place in the 34th precinct of New York City, which is apparently the worst precinct that you could possibly work in, with a Madball being the titular character who's paired with a young new cop in from Japan. And I read one review that I think must probably be one of the most beautiful sentences I've ever read in terms of summing up what this series is. It went something along the lines of, imagine Lethal Weapon, but written and directed by Satan. And that is pretty accurate. Madball 34 is excessively violent and features really very tough to tolerate. In fact, I started skipping over the parts in the second part. Very tough to tolerate violence and abuse of women. And I don't mean in some way that's meant to be played as a joke or anything, as some anime can try to do with varying levels of success, but just outright cruel and barbaric treatment of women, along with violence that within the context of the series is at times shockingly over the top. Now, the violence I don't really care about. That does come off as almost just a joke. The violence towards women, though, I think for a lot of people will be impossible to get over. And I don't blame you. Like I said, I was skipping over it in the second episode. The only thing that saved this series, and what you will hear on Friday, are the sound clips of the beautifully ridiculous New York accents that these characters try to affect. They are the only saving grace of this thing. Otherwise, I gotta tell you, once I'm done pulling clips for the show, I will never watch this thing again because it is gross and obnoxious and not in a fun way like some stuff can be. But again, if you look at it as a parody of what Americans seem to be gravitating towards when Dirty Harry was popular, it does make a kind of sense. But I don't know that that's enough to recommend it for most people because, like I said, you have to stomach some pretty barbaric treatment of women and not in a way that you can really easily gloss over. So unless you're willing to do what I did and fast forward through a lot of that to get to the terrible accents and the over-the-top violence, which can be very funny, I don't know how much I can recommend Madball 34. I've only watched the first 2 parts, so maybe something will change, but yeah, this is a rough one. Later.